Newspaper bloodbath this past week, this time in New Orleans, where the 182-year-old Pulitzer Prize-winning Times-Picayune newspaper, among the first legacy broadsheets to cease 7 days a week print publication, was sold to scrappy competitor The Advocate. Times-Picayune staffers began announcing their layoffs on social media, and these cutbacks come after painful job losses in recent years, as previous owners cut the print edition to 3 days a week to focus on digital delivery. New owners who come from the grocery and restaurant industries say the surviving publication will print daily and both names will appear on the masthead. But like readers in Pittsburgh, which no longer has 7 days a week print paper, will those in New Orleans go hungry for local news? Let's ask Professor Margot Susca from the School of Communication at American University in Washington. Welcome back.
Thanks, Holland.
I come from radio, which has suffered plenty during consolidation. New owners talk a good game, and then the mass firings begin, and local content has been cut to the bone. On the print side, the trained eye detects larger fonts, larger graphics, larger photos, thinner paper, lots of wire copy. Talk about what's not getting covered with these cutbacks and what I've heard you call the news deserts.
Sure, and news desert is actually a term that comes out of the University of North Carolina's research, so I shouldn't take credit for that term, but it is important, and it has forced many of us to start looking at what are the implications for the loss of local newspapers and local coverage in these areas. So let's first start with, and make sure that we understand that you can have a local newspaper in a community that's only giving you coverage from national outlets. So that's one thing to consider. And what research out of Louisiana State University has just been published in December showed that that loss of local coverage is actually increasing political partisanship and polarization, because people are turning to national news, which tends to be more conflict-driven, more Republican versus Democrat, more talking heads, and that is having a real effect in local communities. Then you have these news deserts where you have just no coverage whatsoever. And I think that what gets lost are coverage about local issues, planning and zoning issues, local airport issues, education issues, certainly crime, violence in communities. All of these issues are getting left out of coverage when you're turning to more national or international wire services, and that's having real effects on communities nationwide.
I guess we shouldn't be surprised that we're all more argumentative when there's less coverage, because these national guys just don't have the granularity, don't have the shoe leather reporting in there, right?
That's absolutely right, and I think that when I was I used to be a local education reporter, I covered a county with 40,000 kids, and after I left to enter a PhD program, that newspaper didn't hire a new person. They said to the person who was covering the county just south, you know what, we're going to have you cover both counties now in an area that's 100 miles wide, and you just don't really get to know people on the beat. And most importantly, I think for what I'm looking at now is they don't get to know journalism, and they don't get to understand the role of journalism in civic society. And I think there's a real disconnect between news in American society and what the public even understands as the mission of journalism.
You know, we've seen some of this workflow stuff in radio too, where somebody leaves, they don't get replaced, that job gets dumped in somebody else's lap who may get a new title but no more money. And as for the money, here's the conundrum, and it predates a mercurial president who has reduced the news cycle from a day to an hour or less, because by the time the ink dries, it's not news anymore. Yet newspapers can't make as much money delivering to our phones as they made selling full-page ads to car dealers and furniture stores. So even if an eccentric billionaire hell-bent on saving print rode to the rescue and staffed up a broadsheet, is the medium itself now obsolete?
I think that we have to say that the answer to that is yes. I think that there is a resurgence in long-form narrative. There are still some people. I still get the New York Times on Sunday, but that's more out of habit and maybe shows my age and my generation as much as anything. I think that you've got to see that in 10 years there won't be, none of us are walking out to the end of our driveway or the end of our stoop to get a print product. That being said, we need good journalism, whatever that platform might be. And I think I'm also encouraged by nonprofit models and by single owner models that don't have to return, where those ownership models don't have to return a double-digit share return on investment to shareholders. I think there are some models that are going to take hold. I think that the profit structure is going to look much different than it has for the last decade, or certainly in the last few years, where we've seen this consolidation and layoff madness.
You know, what strikes me as a nice try is these little brother papers like Express here in Washington, which is published by the Post. It's free, and the boxes are right there at the metro subway and the bus stops, and the content is tailored accordingly, and the Post has a new place to sell ads. Do you think this is going to be a viable model for at least keeping the presses rolling?
Well, I think that targeted markets is a niche publications are what you are going to see. Remember, there's growth in some areas of certainly the Washington Post, which is hiring. Let's remember that the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times are up in terms of their digital subscriptions. That's good news for big companies. But there's also a rise in ethnic media in certain targeted markets where you know exactly who you're advertising to. And that's not as possible, I don't think, on the internet. But I think that there are companies that are working on that. But are we giving up some privacy and giving up some of our data knowledge in order to drive that information? I think there are some big questions that loom about privacy and data and how those publications are being created, or who they're targeting for their lists, so to speak. Well,
we applaud the broadsheets for at least being nimble enough to try, huh? Thank you, Professor Margot Susca from American University. Always appreciate your perspective on this
Holland.
Shifting media landscape.
Thanks, Holland.
I'm Larry King, questioning, listening, learning. You know, I've always said I never learned anything when I was talking. It's important to listen. Question more.